I'm doing strategy and you're doing stupid stuff.
Acknowledging uncertainty is scary, but once you do it, it helps you to approach things in a different way. And that will ultimately, I think, result in more success.
That is what enabled a tiny, irrelevant company from Japan to come and whoop your asses.
Those on the front lines don't have to choose at all. They just do.
If they're both doing the same thing, making choices under uncertainty, competition, and constraints, why on earth do we call one of them strategy and one of them execution?
So we need to become better at delegating decision, delegating strategy, because that's the daily work. And at the same time, think about what does it require so that those people can make those choices.
A falsificationist is somebody who believes there aren't any right answers. They're just better ones and worse ones. I was their coach as much as I was their boss.
Why do we need brains? Because we want them to make choices under uncertainty, in competition, and within certain constraints.
Everybody makes choices. It was the boss, could make the decisions, wanted to use that as infrequently as possible.
Strategy is the work for a selected few, extremely smart people, and based on that, we neglect the input that the many people can give us.
The enemy, in some sense, is the technocratic view, which is we can plan for all eventualities up front. If we think hard enough, they were surprised at the degree to which I actually didn't care about planning. I cared about making great choices.
Every day.
Choices every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our Agile Insights conversation. Today, again, with my most frequent guest, Roger Martin. I'm so excited, Roger, to have you with us today.
We will talk about. I've been enjoying these conversations so much, Sohrab.
Thank you. We will be talking about another chapter from Roger's latest book, A New Way to Think. And today's focus, after speaking last time about making choices, which was both like the strategy and the data and all of that, we'll be speaking about execution. And the reason we picked this topic is Roger reached out to me yesterday. He was like, we need to talk about this because people are getting this fundamentally wrong, and probably it adds some value if we have a conversation about this, and we'll dive into this. So Roger, again, thanks for being here.
Oh, thank you. I'm sorry.
Now, my Siri went off. I don't know what that is. So now, as usual, I will bring in some quotes from the book also to set the context, and then we will engage and you will share your thinking on this. Yeah. You start this chapter with the following sentences. The idea that execution is distinct from strategy has become firmly ensconced in management thinking over the past 2 decades. I think even longer than that, right? Then you quote 2 people, one of them, Jamie Dimon, who is today the CEO of JP Morgan, the biggest bank in the world, I think. And Jamie Dimon said, I'd rather have a first-rate execution and second-rate strategy any time than a brilliant idea and a mediocre management. The other person you quote is Larry Bossidy, former Allied Signal CEO, who says strategies most often fail because they aren't well executed. This is also one of the things that most management consulting companies bring up as an excuse when their brilliantly designed strategy suddenly does not result in the things that they told their clients it would be. Now, before we go into how we can differentiate or not even distinguish between execution and strategy, let's start first with why you believe that this distinction between strategy and execution happened in the first place.
Yeah. I think it happened because we love kind of analogies and metaphors to try to understand things in life. We say, well, this is like this other thing that I know and understand. And I think what we did was we as a business world was say, well, top management is kind of like the brain of the company, and the rest of the company is kind of like arms and legs, right? And sort of the brain makes the decisions, and then the arms and legs do things. They execute against the decisions we've made. And that's really comfortable, right? Like it sort of makes sense. And it's consistent with our conception of the brain and the human body. It's really familiar because we all have brains and arms arms and legs, and there are billions of us on the planet doing that. And I think that's what caused us to have that as a conceptualization, and and that became, as things often do, right? They become self-referential. It's sort of like, well, that's how things work. There's strategy, brain, execution, arms and legs, and we should conceptualize everything we do as either strategy or execution. And if the brain decides something and the arms and legs refuse to do it, then nothing good will happen. So therefore, you must have a decision made by the brain, and then arms and legs that do it. That would be my thought. Although I'm interested in if you see any other reason why that would be the case.
Yeah, no, I can relate to that. I think a lot of people come from certain analogies, and based on that, then say, okay, that's just how it is, right? We refer to sports teams, we refer to the body, we refer to nature. And in some cases, I mean, analogies are good. And the reason we get them wrong is, in many cases, that we don't understand the things that we are referring to deep enough.
Yes.
So looking at this from a medical perspective, right, one of the things, and we're going to talk about this, when you say strategy and execution are fundamentally the same thing, which is basically the headline of this chapter in your book, is that people don't understand that even our brains and our organs and our hands and legs are just part of that. They are fundamentally interconnected as well.
Yes.
There's constant feedback loops. It's not like the brain makes a decision to catch a ball and tells the arms and legs, just catch that ball and it's going to be there. No, we have constant calibration between our eyes, between our brain. And then that's the reason why we are able to catch a ball that is thrown at us from 30 yards, 40 yards, whatever, right? Yes. And this constant feedback loops, that's, I think, also something that we're going to dive deeper in today's conversation. So I agree. People start with analogies. And as we don't understand the thing that we're referring to deep enough, it might get us to a flawed perspective. And then we also do things in a not so good way. Let's put it this way.
Yes.
Another thing you point out, which I believe is very important to share here, because we talked about this also before, you say those on the front lines don't have to choose at all. They just do. And in one of our earlier conversations, we talked about this concept that we want everyone to basically participate in decision making, right? Because that's when you also get more engagement, etc. We talked about organizations hiring like smart management consultants, Harvard MBAs, whatever, that do the strategy work, and they do a sample size of 100 interviews, but they completely neglect the insights that their sales team has, talking to hundreds of thousands of customers over many years. And I think the same then is the result of this distinction between strategy and execution, where we believe strategy is the work for a selected few, right? Extremely smart people. Yep. And based on that, we neglect the input that the many people can give us. And you share a story of a bank teller, and maybe you can share that story with us right now before I read from it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, this is many years ago when they used to be called tellers, not CS, customer service reps. And it was this teller who I call Mary in the book. And I was in a what was called a kind of a branch administration officer training program. It was when I was a kid, a relative youngster, and it was it was in Canada, one of Canada's leading banks, Canada's leading bank, in fact. So I always like to shadow people who are outstanding at their jobs, and so I figured out within a week of being there that Mary was the most outstanding of the tellers. How did I figure that out? Is because in the lineup to the teller stations, it was a singular line. People would let customers would let other customers pass them, waiting for Mary to open up to serve somebody, and then they go see Mary. So I just said, let me just shadow Mary. And I just watched Mary to see what she did. And then one day during a break, I said, Mary, I'm curious about something. Can I tell you what I'm observing, and you can tell me kind of whether I've kind of got it more right than wrong? And I said, it seems to me, Mary, that you've got 3 different service models. For some people, they come to your wicket, and you're friendly with them, but there's no small talk at all, and there's nothing but the transaction. They want to deposit a check. This is before ATMs and everything. They want to deposit a check or get some cash or whatever, and you're really nice to them, but there's no discussion about anything else other than that than doing that transaction. I said, and then there are these others who they come to your wicket and you start this long conversation. How's your knee, Mrs. Jones? I know you twisted it, but you don't seem to be wearing that sleeve on it anymore. Does that mean it's better? Oh no, I've been in for physio. Oh, how's the physio going? And everything. And in the midst of that, you do the transaction. And then there's a third kind that's kind of in between. You don't spend as long as you spend on that second time, but they come and do their transaction. But then you make suggestions. You say, well, you're getting a whole lot of cash in your checking account, and if you shifted it over to your savings account, you'd make a little more interest, right? And so there are 3 kind of different service models from my perspective. And Mary says, "Well, you're a smart young boy. You're right. For those first ones, they view banking as an irritation, and they just want me to be friendly. So if I'm stern or unfriendly, they won't like that. They want me to be friendly but fast, and they don't want to talk about anything else because they want to get in and get out as fast. So I got to do that for them. That last group sees me as their sort of the personal financial advisor. And I said, yeah, but aren't those the people in the offices are supposed to be that? And they say, yeah, but they don't like or trust those people as much as they do me. And they've come to believe that I can help them out. And then literally Mary, she went to her drawer and said, and because that was before they had the tellers had sophisticated account systems, computer, whatever, and she had this sheaf of papers for each of the clients of that sort, where she had the details on what accounts and what money they had, so that she could give that advice. So she made up her own system for that. And she said the third group view the bank visit as one of the important social events of the day. And she said, you'll notice they're older, often retired. And if I don't have a conversation with them, they don't think I've given them good service. And I was like flabbergasted. I just said, holy smokes, Mary, this is a sophisticated segmentation scheme with differential kind of service. And then I did something that I knew was a little bit cheeky, because I knew what the answer was going to be. I said, Mary, I'd love to see where in the teller manual they describe these segments and give you the instructions to serve them differently. And she gets white as a sheet, because why? There's nothing whatsoever about this in the teller manual, and she's just done it on her own. She's figured out a strategy for serving customers on her own. And she was afraid that I was going to now kind of turn her in, right? And I said, it's okay, Mary. I knew that would be the case. But here's the question, Mary. Why? Because this is a profound segmentation, and we know people wait to see you. They view it as superior service. Why don't you talk to the manager about adopting this more broadly? You know what her answer was? He wouldn't be interested in what a teller says.
Yeah.
So
nobody would listen to him.
Yeah. There you have it. Right. So the lesson, right, is that choices get made all the way down the organization. Really important choices. Mary made choices about how to segment her customers and serve them differentially to make all of them gleefully, deliriously happy with their service, right? But the management of the bank was completely oblivious to this, right? And that's because they viewed themselves as setting the strategy. The EVP, in Toronto, of branch operations said, "I do branch operation strategy, and they just do as they're told and execute." No, they didn't.
Yeah. And this is the segmentation of customers, and this is how we're going to approach each of those customers, even if probably they didn't even do the segmentation of customers and decided on differentiated offerings.
They had no idea. They were serving them all like they walk into the bank and you just do their transactions. And Mary had to create her own system, right? Her own sheet of cards with people's accounts on it, because the bank didn't produce that for her. So that was a lesson early on to me, which is that everybody makes choices, and you then ask the question, well, are those choices fundamentally different than the EVP of branch operations makes? When you think about it, it's no, not really. She's making choices under uncertainty. Right? She's not all-knowing. She doesn't know everything about it. She has to deal with the uncertainty. Competition, right? There were 4 other banks. There's 5 big banks in Canada. There were 4 other banks within walking distance from that. Competition and constraints. She doesn't have an infinite amount of time. She's got to figure out how to make choices under uncertainty, competition, and constraints, just like the EVP back in Toronto. Which then gets me asking the question, well, gee, if they're both doing the same thing, making choices under uncertainty, competition, and constraints, why on earth do we call one of them strategy and one of them execution? Right? Like why? Yeah. That's not how language systems generally work. When you've got you call this a can, right? A can of soda water. You don't say that's a can of soda water, and then somebody else says that's an elephant, right? That's not how language works. So what is it about it? And the kind of pathetic answers I get to it is, well, at the top of the organization, the CEO is not constrained, right? Mary way down has all sorts of constraints that she's got to operate under. And I say to anybody who tells me that, I say, I guess you've never either been a CEO or probably know
met a CEO.
Met a CEO their entire friggin' life, because the first thing they would say is, I got constraints, I got the capital markets, I got boards, of directors, regulators. Like, I've got macroeconomic conditions, etc. So they're constrained too. And they make choices under those constraints, with facing uncertainty and facing competition. And so I say, so you can't. So let me get this straight. You can't tell me a way in which the people doing this thing called execution, you can't tell me any way in which what they're doing is meaningfully different than what the CEO is doing when he or she formulates strategy. But still, you're going to stick with this. And they do. No. That's execution, Roger. And without great execution, the strategy is meaningless and everything. And I say, see, you're changing the subject. I've asked you, what activities do they engage in that make it different enough to have a different name? And I've yet to get even a halfway decent answer to it. And so they say, well, then why don't we call it strategic execution? It's like, you can put strategic in front of it to keep it alive. You've changed the subject again. You cannot give me any answer to the question, what is different about the activities involved in it? And there's a but Roger, that's very theoretical, right? Unless you practically get stuff done, then it doesn't matter. And I say, you're changing the subject again. You still haven't told me how it's different. Now, if you want, right, if you want to have two different names for the same thing, I guess we can do this. We could have some people calling this a can and other people calling it a grommet or something. But it feels to me as though that kind of confuses with no particular value. And then if in addition, those people actually, you accept the fact those people are actually making choices and they need to make really good ones, and you give it a word, a name that suggests that it's choiceless, you've made the choices, they're just doing, then how inspiring is that for the people who are, quote, just doing? And the answer is it's just insulting. It's utterly insulting. And so you have two names for the same thing, and the second name makes it like, I'm doing strategy and you're doing stupid stuff, wrote stupid stuff. So you created confusion and you have demotivated the people doing it. And I just say, why is that right?
Yeah. Now, I might have a hypothesis where this might come from.
Sure.
And I think the nature of work has fundamentally changed, right? If we go 100 years back, a bit more than that, 1906, 1907, when Ford started working on the Model T, right, first mass-produced car, there is this famous quote from Henry Ford. He says, it's a pity that when you need a pair of hands, they come with a brain attached.
Yes.
Right? Because back then, he didn't necessarily need his people working on the line to make choices all the time, right? They had like other line managers who would say, okay, this is the type of work you have to do. And they basically needed semi-automated robots, but they didn't have robots, so they had to take people. Yeah. And you could make an argument for, okay, back then, there's a difference between strategy and execution, right? You just have to do this. Yeah. Now, the Japanese have told us, or taught us, basically with their lean philosophy, that even on the line, it makes sense if you have not brainless people, right? And those people were not brainless, but they had to act as if they were brainless.
Right. They were
asked. If you have people, they were asked to do this, right? It's still beneficial to have people that are looking at this, identifying that, oh, this could be a point of a mistake, right? And if we build this mistake into the car or this bug into the car, it will have like significant costs later. And through that continuous improvement, which involved all of those blue collar workers, they were able to build much better cars, at least with lower rates of mistakes. So I have a sense that it might be from that past. But even if that was true back then, again, everything has changed. Yes. No organization today is looking for a pair of hands. They're looking for brains.
Yes.
And why do we need brains? Because we want them to make choices, right? Under uncertainty, in competition, and within certain constraints set by the environment, but also set by the organization. And then it becomes much more of a question, what are the constraints within which I want to allow people to make choices, right? And to what extent do I decentralize decisions to get faster decisions, and how do I set the context to get better decisions? So I think this is the important point. Historically, a lot has changed, but many businesses have not adapted yet.
No, and I like that, Sohrab, and I would even characterize it the following way, which is that Henry Ford came up with such a fantastic new technology, i.e. the assembly line, that allowed him to have a deeply flawed model of human beings, right? Because the technology was so great, right? But then Toyota came along and essentially said, oh, well, anybody can use that technology. We can have an assembly line too. But here's the thing: we're going to dispense with this tragic flaw about how you manage the people in that system. So it worked until there was a competitor that said we can do it a different and better way, and you can argue, right, that competitor essentially kind of drove the people who treated workers a different way into bankruptcy. Now the government bailed out General Motors and Chrysler. Ford managed to not hit bankruptcy, but that was the eventual result, right? Which is your flawed approach to strategy versus execution, and calling a thing execution that wasn't. That is what enabled a tiny irrelevant company from Japan to come and whoop your asses, which is stunning in many respects. Whoop your asses in your backyard, right? In your
own market.
Yeah, right. Like how could that happen? Right. I think the answer is it had a lot to do with strategy versus execution.
Execution. Yeah. And I mean, again, looking at how things have changed, you mentioned uncertainty, right? You mentioned constraints. You mentioned competition. Now, all three of those things, last time I checked, they have increased over the past 100 years.
Yes.
So the pace at which we see uncertainty, faster, right? The competition, much stronger. The constraints that we have through regulators, boards of directors, financial markets, all of that completely different to how things were 100 years ago. Now, if that's the case, it's probably not enough. And this goes back to your fundamental definition of strategy. You don't do a strategy and then you're like, okay, for the next 5 years, we're fine, right? Yeah. It's constant inspect and adapt. You might set like you might define on a high level, where are we going to play and how are we going to win? But even that is going to be calibrated as you go. And therefore, the distinction, you mentioned this particularly, between strategy and execution, not only does not benefit the organization, it creates a lot of harm.
Yes.
And then you go and come up with a different approach. Now, let's dive into this different approach, which you refer to strategy as a choice cascade. And you can hopefully share an example, because in the book, you've provided a lot of examples from different areas. But I think if I read it correctly, in that particular chapter, you don't provide an example from your own work, which you can do today.
Yeah, no, lots of people sort of, their final line of defense, right? After I've got them flummoxed because they can't tell me what execution actually is and how it's different. They say, but this is impractical. You can't do that. You've got to have a strategy, and then you've got to have execution of that strategy. You've got to make sure that people execute it, or nothing is going to happen. So I'll give the example I'll give, right? Like I always eat the dog food, right? So I do not tell anybody in any of my work, I do not tell somebody to do something I don't do myself. And so I do not ever talk about implementation, execution, versus formulation in my own work. So the story here is Rotman School of Management, which I was dean of for 15 years, from 1998 to 2013. I got to the Rotman School as dean, at the first academic job in my entire life, so I don't know why they hired me, but I got to Rotman School at University of Toronto. It's at that point clearly, at best, the fourth best business school in Southern Ontario, right? The Ivy School was number one by a long shot, and then people would argue whether Queen's or Schulich were next, and we were trailing them. Completely irrelevant, actually, kind of with a faculty that kind of nobody paid much attention to. Very few professors could actually write for the globally relevant journals. Had a deficit. Was generally called in the university the faculty of mismanagement, not the faculty of management, which is its official name. Okay, so that's where we start. And
it's the context.
That's the context. And then fast forward to 15 years later, we are unquestionably the number one business school in Canada, and ain't even close. Like, it's a foregone conclusion in anybody's mind. We're the only one with a global reputation. Our faculty, based on the outside objective Financial Times ranking, is ranked third in the world after only Harvard and Wharton, ahead of Stanford, Berkeley, Columbia, Sloan, Fuqua, you name it. Just absolutely stunning turnaround. So you'd ask, well, what was the managerial system that enabled us to make this incredibly stunning turnaround? And I was named first, like, outside the United States from a public university, global business school, Dean of the Year, right? So how did that?
The question would be, Roger, what was the strategy?
What was the strategy? So how did I manage it? Which is, I did what I say you should do, right? Which is, the CEO, which the dean kind of is, CEO of the business unit, if you will, the CEO should make the decisions that he or she, he in my case, he is most equipped to make, and no other decisions, right? And so I had the perspective to say, here's what we're going to do. We're going to seek to be Canada's only globally relevant business school. So I didn't actually say we're going to be the number one business school in Canada. I said I don't care. What I care about is being a globally recognized school that happens to be in Canada, because it's a patriotic act. I'm Canadian, you can tell from my accent, and I wanted to have one such school. More would be even better, but we're gonna have one. We're going to do that, right, by reinventing business education. That's why our tagline was a new way to think, integrative thinking, design. We're going to have to double the size of the school. And then after that, we're going to increase it by another 50%. But the first thing was to double the size, because we're irrelevantly small. All the consequential global schools are much bigger than we were. And we're going to double all programs, undergrad, MBA, PhD, etc., to be globally relevant in size. And all of our programs are going to be a winner in the segment of the market in which they're competing. And if any program can't figure out how to do that, we'll just cut it, because great business school doesn't have second-rate programs. Okay, so that I made those choices, and there was, people were kind of flabbergasted, and most people thought I was nuts. In fact, one of our most senior finance professors, after I sort of announced this at faculty council, just said, "Oh God, this is going to be a disaster, Roger. Sorry to say, but you're going to fail and fail utterly." Bless him. He came to my office 5 years later and said, "You remember what I said, Roger? Like, I want to be a man of my word. You remember what I said?" And I said, "I think I did." And he repeated what he said, and he said, "I was wrong." And I got to admit when I was wrong. But what did I then do? Did I tell my people, you must execute on this strategy? No. I chartered strategic choices to them. So for instance, just to give it for instance, we had a crummy EMBA program, Executive MBA program. Ivy had the leading program. Schulich had done a joint venture with Kellogg to have the Kellogg-Schulich MBA, EMBA, and we were nowhere on that. I went to Beatrix Dart, who had taken over relatively recently the EMBA program, and said, "Beatrix, here's the deal. You've got to figure out how to reinvent our EMBA program to make it distinctive. It doesn't have to win with every single student, but there's got to be a segment of really attractive students, right, that have good grades and are going to do good things in their career, that will say, wow, the Rotman School program is the perfect one for me. If we can't, we're going to shut it down." That's it. And that's it, right? So your job, Beatrix, is to figure out a strategy for the EMBA program. I gave her criteria, right? It has to be the most attractive EMBA program. I also said we can invest in it. It doesn't have to be tomorrow, but that's what we've got to aim for. She went off.
That's the constraints.
Yeah, the constraint, exactly the constraints. And I told her what it had to look like, what the goal was of that program. That goal of that program is for that segment, experienced kind of people who want to come back and do an MBA while being fully employed, an MBA degree while being fully employed. That's what it is. She goes off and completely reinvents the length, the format, etc. Relaunches it, and within 5 or 7 years was clearly the number one MBA program in the catchment area, prospering incredibly with great students. It became the hardest to get into, severely damaged the competitors while doing it. So that's choice chartering. I went to Peter Pauly, who was the associate dean and later vice dean of faculty, and said, "Listen, Peter, to be a world-class business school, we have to have world-class faculty." One of the things that is a problem is that we have faculty that value research way over teaching. That's the culture of this place. And if we were hiring for a new position and there was a complete jerk who was openly negative about teaching and the bothersomeness of students getting in the way of their research, but they had 7 published articles, and then we were comparing them to somebody who is a lovely human being, would be a great colleague, loves teaching, and has 6 articles, 100% of the time we would favor the jerk. And I said, we're not going to do that, right? So we've got to figure out how to get people who are great researchers, great colleagues, and great teachers, and bias in that direction. And we're going to fix the economics of the place to be able to hire world-class faculty at world-class salaries. At the time, we couldn't. And so you go figure out how to build a great faculty. And he did, right? He built like a thing of rare beauty. We had 36 faculty members at the time, full-time tenure stream. We had 120 by the time I left, and were considered one of the finest faculties on the face of the planet. Did I ask him to execute my strategy? No. He had to make some really, really tricky choices: how to recruit, how to set up the system to not get what we had to offer by way of salaries and the structure of the job, how to make sure it was a friendly environment that young professors would want to come here because we have a track record of them getting tenure because they're nurtured, blah blah blah. That was all Peter Pauly, and when he went to meetings of vice deans of academic across the university and told them sort of like what he was doing, they'd say, "But shouldn't the dean be doing that?" And he would be, "Well, no, he's asked me to do it," right? So he can feel all inspired about it and became famous, right? And beloved. Went to the CAO, was like the chief financial officer, Mary Ellen Yeomans, wonderful woman too, just like Beatrix, and say, what we need is economics that would enable us to afford a great student experience and hire world-class faculty at world-class rates. We don't have that now, and one of the reasons is the provost every year decides what your revenue is, right? And so you can't actually plan long-term. You've got to figure out a way to create an economic model for the business school that will work, right? And here's how it's got to work. It's got to produce the economics to allow us to have a faculty of world-class scholars being paid world-class dollars. The student experience has got to be much higher quality. We got to have afford more student services, etc. You figure it out. And what does she do? She goes off and creates resource center management, and works with the university with my help, like because I had to do. But she's the lead person figuring out a system because she had worked at Central for a few years before coming to the Rotman School. She knew the system and how it worked and figured out a way to do something that didn't offend the way the university worked, but worked for us. And we had this transformational system, which, by the way, when a guy named David Naylor became president of University of Toronto about 10 years into my term, because we'd been so successful at this, redid the entire university system to mirror our system, right?
Your system, yeah.
Yeah. Did I do that? Was she executing my strategy? Hell no. And we would have never gotten there if I would have told her to execute my strategy, because I wouldn't have known kind of how to do it. I had no experience with Central. I didn't know how to do that. I needed her to do it. And it's on and on. Ken McGuffin, our media relations person, went to Ken and said, we have no money. We're poor. We have a deficit. Ivy Schulich have got oodles more money to pay to spend on advertising. We don't have no money to spend on advertising. Here's what we got to do. We got to get unpaid media, right? Which is our professors appearing quoted in articles, and so that earned media kind of will win for us. They don't come to talk to us at all because we're kind of like nowhere, nothing. And so, Ken, please come up with a media relations strategy to do that. And he does, right? He figures out now that he knows the dean is 100% behind this, and that I'm sort of an interesting character at the time. It was like Brain Gain coming back to Canada, this interesting guy with interesting ideas. He uses me as the Trojan horse here. He goes and talks to the media like, this exciting guy, Roger. If you want to interview him for any article, just call me and I'll have him return around. I would do exactly what he said. If he called me, I'd drop anything to talk to somebody in the media, and became by far and away the most mentioned person of any business school person, dean or otherwise, by far. Then Ken said, Roger, every time I can swap, if they say, could I get Roger to talk about this? I'll say, no, Will Strange is a better professor for it, because now I need to spread out, and you're going to go down, and others are going to go up. That was not my strategy, him executing my strategy. That was him figuring out a clever strategy. And we used to pay for a service that measured our share of voice. So there were, at the time, were 34 business schools in Canada, MBA programs in Canada. And we stopped paying for the service to measure when we hit 60% share of voice. So the other 33 had to share 40 points, and we had 60 points. Devastating. Yeah. Devastating.
From nowhere.
All these other schools were out advertising us, but we were, and they were like, how is Rotman so sort of famous in our markets, and everybody thinks about Rotman? They don't advertise. Ken McGuffin, media strategy. Rotman magazine, right? Went to Karen and said, we've got to repurpose our academic work for a practical business audience. We've got this alumni magazine, Rotman magazine. Here's my thought is I want you to figure out how to make this a go-to source of business information. We got no money. So you're a one-man, one-woman band. But go figure out how we can make this something. And she goes and figures out, she said, things like Harvard Business Review and everything aren't themed. People would like themed kind of issues. And, I'll go out to academics who are in a given field, and I will take their articles, rewrite them for a business audience, and then go back to them and say, have I rewritten this in a good way that you'd be willing to, put your name on it, and they all were like, oh wow, this is great. I can reach a new audience. I didn't have to do any work. Karen Christensen did, and blammo, we became something that actually Harvard Business Review, right, at Ignatius said, man, we look at what you're doing and it's really, really clever. That's an important magazine. And our articles are now distributed on the HBR site, right? That's how much they respect us. Did I do Rotman magazine strategy? No. Karen Christensen did it. Ken McGuffin did it. Mary Ellen Yeomans, Peter Pauly, Beatrix Dart. So we turned around the Rotman School in a spectacular fashion with no resources, right? We didn't have a bag of money from anybody to do it, by having I think, an excellent strategy at the top, right? I made a few choices that were better ones than not, but then a whole bunch of other people made great strategy choices in their domain that fed into that. And because they observed me doing what I was doing, they passed it on. They did it to the next level. And that became, and so we lost almost nobody. We lost almost no professors, even in an industry where there's a high turnover of professors. Almost no staff that we didn't want to lose, because people were inspired because I didn't tell them to execute my brilliant strategy. They were inspired because I told them, you got to make some choices, some really important choices. Here's the context. Here's what the form the answer has to take. Go get them. And that is the way. Now I know it's $100 million. It was $100 million business by the time I left. It's not a gigantic organization, but man, are they complicated ones? Notably hard to manage. And instead of doing what most people would have said, since they're so hard to manage, you got to be a real bear on execution. You got to call them in and say, are you executing my strategy? Tell me exactly what you're doing, and you got to do this. I didn't. I did exactly the opposite. And in fact, I actually it worked, but I had to do something like at University of Toronto. They have an accountability framework where you've got to sign the accountability of doing a set of things. You have to check each box and sign at the bottom. And I sent back to the provost with some of the boxes kind of not checked, because I said, I don't have accountability for that. Like one of them was, have you reviewed the actuals against budget for each month? And I said, no. In fact, I never do that. Marianne Yeomans does that, and does a better job than I do. And he said, but you're not being accountable. And I said, I am. I'm just not doing that list of things that you said in order to be accountable. And that's sort of the execution thing. You're going to do this list of things in order to be accountable. I said, no, I'm not. And after a big fight, right, he finally kind of relented and sort of said, yeah, but sort of warned me, well, if you guys go off the track from a budget standpoint, it's going to be your neck. And I said, perfect. Sounds good to me. And we never did. And again, Mary Ellen Yeomans would go to the university-wide CAO meetings, right? Chest puffed up. And they'd say, well, what have you been doing? And she would describe the things she was doing. And they're like, but how is that possible? How's that possible? What, your dean doesn't do that? She said, no, right? And same with Peter Pauly. You mean you sign off on all the faculty hires? Right? That's supposed to be the dean's job. Said, not my dean, right? Because he is going to make better decisions than I would make, because he can sit in on all those job talks. He can sit in on all the committee meetings of the hiring committee for the next whatever strategy professor or operations professor. I can't. So why am I holding that decision to me? or doing this stupid ass thing and saying, it's my faculty strategy, you go execute it, Peter, right? He would have never treated the job the way he treated it, which was, it was sort of sacred, right? It's like, oh my God, Roger is counting on me to create a world-class faculty from nothing, virtually nothing. Oh my God. And I think he went home every night sort of saying, I have an epic responsibility here. If I can't do this, Roger's hopes and dreams for the school overall, which was all of our hopes and dreams, but if you personalized it to be Roger's hopes and dreams to make this Canada's kind of only globally relevant, consequential business school, it goes up in smoke. So I'm going to think as hard as I can possibly think. I'm going to work as hard as I can possibly work to make this happen. That is choice chartering, right? Is saying we all make choices, and your job is to charter choices to all the people who report to you, and to say, hey, and I said to all of them, hey, if you need help making those decisions, my door is open, right? Come back and talk to me. And Mary Ellen did many, many times. She's like, right, well, we could probably do this. We could probably get away with getting the university to give us this kind of latitude, but we'd have to give up this and this. What do you think? And I'm like, Mary Ellen, that sounds right. Like we had to give up the ability to get bailed out, right? If you missed your budget at the end of the year, the provost could say, well, I'm going to allocate another $200,000 to you so that you balance your budget. We had to give that up completely. And Mary Ellen was, really, Roger, are like, this is a big deal. Are you comfortable? Yep, I am. So they would come to me. We would talk about things, but whose choice was it in the end?
It was their choice. Yeah.
So it's doable. It's absolutely doable.
It's doable, absolutely. Now, while you were sharing this, Roger, and I love the fact that you provided not only one example of one person, but you provided examples of multiple people with responsibilities in different areas.
Very different.
Which, and you mentioned, not a big business of 100 million. I think, right, based on my standards, it's a big business. And I think once you get to a certain size, the challenges, they are different from one person to 10 people, from 10 to 50, from 50 to 100. But once you're above 1,000, right, and you are responsible already for people that are responsible for other people, and they are responsible for other people, so you already have multiple layers, then the principles are actually, to some extent, universally applicable. What I see mostly with organizations not being able to do this or not willing to do this is they are not aware, or they don't want to be aware of the uncertainty that still exists after you set a strategy.
Yes.
And the stories you shared brilliantly demonstrated, yes, you said, okay, we want to be that kind of a business school, but how do we hire top researchers that are also great teachers and great colleagues? That's uncertainty. That's a big question.
Yep.
Even if you define that, now one person can say, okay, Roger was just too lazy to just set out a concrete strategy, which would provide answers to all of these things. Now, in the midst of uncertainty, if you provide answers to all of these things, and let's just talk about the hiring process, you're providing those answers based on assumptions. Who knows whether those assumptions are true or not? Now, for me, it's always, when we speak, connecting these things to the topics of Agile, right? That's the community that I serve, where I want to bring them new thinking. And it's exactly this. Any organization can decide that's the type of product we want to work on. And the past thinking of not being aware of the uncertainty led to the waterfall approach, which is, as part of your strategy, you define everything about that product. And guess what? Many products were built that neither the customer liked, nor did they meet the budget, nor did they result in the business results that we want to have as an organization.
And took twice as long to get there too. It took double.
Absolutely.
Twice as long to get to a place that was a terrible place. Yeah, great.
Exactly. And how we get there, how we get to good products is, yes, we need to make a choice. What kind of product is this going to be? Is it going to be a car, a truck, a plane, a bus, whatever? What is it? But that decision is made. And then how we build that truck and we make a truck that customers really love, that requires a whole new set of choices on a daily basis. And one of the things that I think also I saw some things on LinkedIn where people were discussing with you, yeah, execution is fundamentally different than strategy. It's also a different definition of strategy.
Yes. Yep.
Right? If strategy is about what we plan or what we think, and you have a great video on strategy is not planning, right? Yeah. There's a difference. Yeah. But if strategy is what we do, then that doing happens on a daily basis.
Yep.
It happens with the customer service representative or the bank teller. It happens with the EVP. It happens with all sorts of people. And then the job becomes, and that's the tricky part, it's also not about a CEO saying, okay, I don't take any more decisions. You laid out, there are decisions that you took, right? Those decisions resulted in certain constraints and questions for the next level.
Yep.
But in addition to those constraints, you also provided them with a lot of clarity. Okay, what is it that you are going to be responsible for? Not accountable, responsible for.
Yeah.
And you assessed whether they have the competence to do that.
Yeah.
And you created an environment of safety where they could be courageous.
Yes.
I always say, in order for people to take decisions, it takes three things. You need to have clarity. Where are we going?
Yeah.
You need to have the competence of decision making.
Yeah.
And you need to be courageous enough, which requires safety to say, all right, that's the decisions. That's where we're going. And I think that strategy choice cascade that you laid out, or this chartering, this is really, really important for most organizations to follow, because otherwise they won't be able to deal with the amount of decisions based or due to the pace of change that have to be made on a daily basis. No CEO, especially the larger the organizations get, can do this. How? They cannot sit in on every interview. They cannot decide on the budget for every single department. They cannot think about the curation of every single article that goes into the Rotman review. They can't. How can we? Right? Yeah. None of us can do that. No. So we need to become better at delegating decision, delegating strategy, because that's the daily work. And at the same time, think about what does it require so that those people can make those choices. Empowerment is one piece of it. I think enablement is the other piece, where then some of your work probably went into like helping them make better choices.
Yeah. Yeah. And being in some sense, I was their coach as much as I was their boss. I think they would. Yes. I think they would say that's that's what I did. I would rarely come to them and say, "Hey, I'm Dean. I'm the boss. I'm making this decision. You're not." Right? I wouldn't. That was to me kind of useless. Right? It's like, I think it's like the story. The best weapon is the one you never use. So the weapon I had was I was the boss. I could make the decisions. I just didn't wanted to use that as infrequently as possible. And I did make some decisions up front. Yes. We're going to compete to win. We're going to be distinctive. But then I put the gun away, right? In some sense, and said now. It's for coaching. And again, lots of people thought, since I was, this business guy coming from the outside, that I would end up firing everybody and starting from scratch. I did very little of that. Mary Ellen Yeomans, I inherited. Peter Pauly, I inherited. They were with me both of them, for example, were with me for all 15 years. Same with Ken McGuffin, I inherited. Karen Christensen, I inherited. Right? I mean, but what the problem was previously is they had a strategy versus execution planning kind of mentality, and we had a plan because the university insisted on us having a 5-year plan, and it was a big thick document, whatever, and I got like. Peter and Mary Ellen early on were kind of like upset with me because I was not paying enough attention to the planning process. right? Uh, and it's true. I wasn't. I couldn't care less. And once we did the plan, it went on a shelf and kind of nothing else. And I said, listen, all these numbers 5 years out are just made up anyway. So it doesn't really matter. So you know, they were surprised at the degree to which I actually didn't care about planning. I cared about making great choices. We were going to make great
every day.
choices every day. And I think that's what was inspiring. Did everything work out well? No. I did have to kind of replace some people, and some people I put in jobs weren't. Your second point, they weren't capable or competent to do it. But I would say that the approach to management that I'm advocating, you figure it out a lot faster, right? If you have this, I'm strategy, you're executing, and I create this incredibly detailed plan, hand it off to you, and say, go execute this. A person who's not really competent can use that to hide their incompetence for a lot longer than if I say, hey, this is what we're trying to accomplish. You need to go away and figure out a strategy for accomplishing that. If they're like a deer in the headlights at that point, you'll know within a couple of months. Oops, that I guessed wrong on that person's capability, and then you can be agile, right? As you say, then adjust and get somebody else. But I really think,
get somebody else,
yeah,
or provide the person with the support that they need, right?
Yes.
And help them build up the capabilities. Both are options, and then it depends on how fast they can pick up that skill set.
Yeah. And it's interesting, if I can go to Agile for a minute. I wrote a piece on Agile and say there's this kind of distrust between Agile people and strategy people to a certain degree. And I'm now, from doing all these discussions with you and whatever, I'm better understanding it. I think Agile people, like Agile believers, if you will, are really hate strategic planners. Because they feel like waterfall, and because strategic planning dominates in the world of strategy rather than strategy. It just occurred to me I can better understand kind of why there's this sort of nervousness with Agile people, because it feels to me as though, right, there are these two kind of major things at war in the world of business. One is the technocrats. And so those are the strategic planners, and in your world, the waterfall people. And even though waterfall has been so discredited, people won't say I'm doing waterfall, but lots of them are still. I think you would agree, right? Lots of them are still doing by other names, and so those are the technocrats. And I think my way of thinking about strategy and the Agile way of working are designers.
Perfectly.
Yeah, but they're designers, right? That's what it's, technocrats versus designers, right? So Agile people want to design a way of working, a way of approaching a problem that is generative, flexible, kind of self fixing rather than self sealing. And that's what I want to do in strategy. And so anyway, but it's the enemy in some sense is the technocratic view, which is we can plan for all eventualities up front if we think hard enough.
That's the point.
We can figure all of that stuff out, and then we can be like Henry Ford in the old days. Then we can give it to hands to go do it, and the bastards aren't going to start thinking on me, right? That's sort of the technocratic view of life, and it dominates. I realize more and more as I go along, as I write about these things, it just dominates still the world of business.
Yes. I think it's fundamentally, to what extent are we aware that we're making assumptions and that we don't know?
Yes.
right? A lot of people are not willing to accept that they don't know. And
Right.
what they believe they know is actually an assumption.
Yes.
Because the moment it becomes like true to you that this is an assumption, you would have to take the next step, which means validating your assumption. You
Yes.
couldn't go and say, no, 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 but that's the truth, right? We talked about this in terms of how to deal with a pandemic.
Yes.
Nobody really knew how to deal with a pandemic.
Yes.
And they tried to bring up like scientific approaches, but part of a scientific approach is inspection and adaptation.
Yes.
But you only do inspection and adaptation if you acknowledge that you're making assumptions. So to this day, just to stick to this example for a moment, in Germany, and I think it's the same thing in many other countries, but I can't speak about Germany, we still don't know, right? Because we never did the examination where most infections occur, one, in terms of COVID, right? To what extent masks help. There's this assumption, I mean, medically in a lab, you can prove anything, but in terms of like in reality and based on how people actually wear the masks.
Yeah.
And third, to what extent or for what period of time do the vaccines protect us,
Yes.
right? They just say, go get the next shot. But one way to assess this is to go and have 1,000 people and take a blood sample and see what's the antibody titer in their blood. And then you know. And it's not that expensive. I checked with one of my friends who's a medical doctor, like having a practice. He says it's 17 euros per person to make this test.
Oh, wow.
Multiply this by 1,000. It's not that much, considering how much we're spending. Yeah. But they have this technocratic view, and they don't go and assess the assumptions because they believe they know.
Yes.
And that's the fundamental piece. Not knowing, like acknowledging uncertainty is scary.
Yeah.
But once you do it, it helps you to approach things in a different way.
Yeah.
And that will ultimately, I think, result in more success. So we have to take that first step, acknowledging uncertainty, acknowledging not knowing,
Yes.
and that working accordingly. And whenever I read your work, be it this book, be it other books, I don't see any difference between what I teach in terms of an agile approach to building a product, to setting up a strategy and all of that. And so I think it's very compatible. But based on what I learned during my time at Bain and how we worked there are differences.
Yes.
As you pointed out, you made that plan and you said to your team, those numbers were made up anyway.
Yes.
You acknowledge that.
Yes.
But most people say, no, those numbers, we got to them in a sophisticated way. We have this huge Excel model. What do you mean they were made up? We have to hit those numbers. And that's where you have this clash between the agile people and the technocrats, right? Yeah. The people that believe in clocks, which are predictable, and the people that say, no, most of the things are clouds. We cannot predict how they are, but we can constantly observe them. And then on a shorter term basis, make predictions with regards to the future. So that's my take on this.
No, and if I can just weave in another kind of school of thought, I think if Karl Popper or Emery Lakatos were listening to you at this point, they would say, well, Sohrab, you are a falsificationist. Because they made a distinction between falsificationist and justificationist. So a justificationist is interested in finding out the right answer, and they'll work towards getting the right answer because when they're at the right answer, they can kind of stop, and then if there's any data that comes to light that would go against the right answer, they try to dismiss it. They say, well, that's not relevant. That's not good data. Somebody made that up because they are attempting to justify the rightness of their answer. And he said instead, a falsificationist is somebody who believes there aren't any right answers. They're just better ones and worse ones. And whatever answer you come up with is going to be superseded in due course by an even better answer as we come to understand the world more. So they view their job as not trying to find the right answer. Their job is to find better answers. And some people sort of say to me, "Oh my God, Roger, that falsificationism is sort of very pessimistic. There aren't any right answers, right? Oh my God." And I say, well, if you think about it, there's a pattern of optimism and pessimism here. So for the justificationist, they're supremely optimistic about the current, right? Because they've gotten to the right answer and there will never be a better answer. So they're extremely pessimistic about the future, right? Whereas a falsificationist is actually quite pessimistic about today, right? They're like, I know what I'm doing is not perfect. Absolutely. And it'll be shown to be flawed in due course. However, they're super optimistic about there'll always be a better answer and a better answer and a better answer and a better answer. And again, I think Agile is implicitly falsificationist. It says,
I've never heard that.
Yeah.
It makes a lot of sense.
No, I hadn't thought about it before. I mean, this is why I like these conversations with you, Sohrab. I think about things in them, but it might be something. It might be something for, if nobody's done this in the Agile movement, to look at those scholars, Karl Popper, and then Emre Lakatos, are the people, or at least who I think about, who have the most coherent things to say about the worldview of falsificationism. And I know enough about my own practice to know I'm a falsificationist strategist. And so people...
That's why this book.
Yes, exactly. But people will say to me, but Roger, then how can we ever commit to a strategy? But Popper and Lakatos would say, at time t equals 0, you should commit to the best answer you've come up with, but don't ignore disconfirming data that comes in that would lead you to a better answer. And they wouldn't say, like, if you got, whatever, $1 billion in the bank account, spend all $1 billion on this strategy. They'd say, leave some in the bank account for the fixes that you're gonna have to do, which again, I think is an Agile thing, which is like, don't
absolutely
100% of your resources right now to this is what the software team is going to do precisely. Commit to a first set of steps and leave some powder dry to when we figure out, oh my God, we can't make a truck like that, but we can make a different kind of truck. You can adjust. So it might be
absolutely.
It might be, since you're the thinking man's Agile person, you like the theory of it. It might enhance the way you can talk about and conceptualize and help people in the movement essentially take note of when they're dealing with a justificationist, because they'd have a better understanding of why they're being that way. Which may help out. Anyway, that's just...
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And Karl Popper, I referred to Clouds and Clocks.
Yes.
That's from one of his essays.
Exactly.
And I absolutely agree, right? I mean, when I read your book, you constantly say, okay, there's this model, which is the popular one, but there's probably a better one, right? And you never say that your model is like the last one that's going to be there, because I believe you're also a falsificationist.
Yes.
And one thing that I would add here is falsificationists are, at least in my case, and I think in your case, incredibly curious people.
Yes.
So even if they are pessimistic about the status quo, like there's always a better way, but that's also curiosity, like, and that's exploration, and that makes things exciting. So I don't see us being negative people just because we're falsificationists.
That's right. No, that's right. That's right. We're optimistic about the future.
Roger, optimistic about the future. Yeah. Roger, again, thank you so much for your time. In our next conversation, we'll take up another section of the book, but this was great. You provided great examples. I think we had a fun time talking about these things, especially now at the end. I learned a lot. I hope our viewers learned a lot. And I hope also, and you mentioned this, you got a few new thoughts, which might result in a few new blog posts from your end.
It could well be. It could well be. I've gotten some thoughts. Absolutely.
Thank you so much. See you soon.
Indeed. Take care.